I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal.
A group of 8 middle schoolers were split into groups to complete a documentary. They chose certain duties and decided to complete a documentary on the history of systematic racism in their city. The question that drove them was, who is our neighbor and how does racism affect the people in my city? They researched people in Fort Worth who have dedicated their life to stopping and understanding racism, and those who are impacted by racism. They interviewed experts on racism such as the Real Scoop Group President Rosa Navajar, Bob Ray Sanders, a journalist and leader of the Racism Task Force of Fort Worth, and an African-American woman, Uimana Obuse.
Growing up, there wasn't that many Hispanics here, so there wasn't a lot of the diversity that we have today. Even when I graduated in '74 in Diamond Hill, there wasn't a lot of Hispanics there. Today is a predominantly Hispanic community, but back then it wasn't. And so our parents were trying to get us ready for the future, not knowing in the late '70s, especially in the '80s, the migration that was coming.
Always been like the one black, so it's different, but I don't think that I have, you'll never really know. You won't know if you've missed out as on a job opportunity or an acceptance to a school or anything like that based on gender or race, because they're not supposed to, but you won't really know.
Hospitals for African Americans to go to until 1922 in the basement of St. Joseph Catholic Hospital. This was the only hospital that African Americans could go to at this time.
When I started school, in fact, when I was born, there were only 2 hospitals in Fort Worth that would take patients who were black. One of them was the City County Hospital, which is now John Peter Smith, and one was the Catholic Hospital, which was St. Joseph. And even they, when a mother came to give birth, had to go to the basement of those hospitals to give birth. They didn't want black kids on the same floor.
As a female, even my first job in banking, I was told I had 3 strikes against me. Number 1, I was female. Number 2, I was Hispanic. And number 3, I was Catholic. And so, you run across that, whether, especially for Latinas, we'll run across it because of our gender, and we'll run across it because of our race.
Minorities have to work twice as hard to show that we are just as qualified.
Because it's an important piece. We should not lose our heritage or our language, because even a gentleman that I worked for, Brad Rehor, in the banking industry when I used to work in banking, when his grandmother passed, he was telling me he was really upset because he said that the culture, the language, everything died with her, and he had nothing to give to his children.
In the early 90s, I was living in Los Angeles. We had the LA riots, which was based on the police always being really oppressive towards the minorities in Los Angeles, and a person got beat up really bad by a huge amount of cops. I can't remember how many, it was maybe 15 cops, and it was videotaped. It was just like coincidence that someone had a video camera at that time and ended up on the news, and it turned into this huge uprising in Los Angeles because those cops got acquitted. They didn't even get any time for what they had done.
First Street. And in 1956, when the first black moved north of First Street in the first block, there was a major, in fact, the person who did that, he's still living. His name is Reverend Austin. He's in a nursing home right now, and I've seen him recently. But they came to his house to burn down his house. And he came out with his rifle, protect his wife and daughter. And people were out yelling epithets in his yard. There's a picture that went on the front page of the Star-Telegram. And that was the other thing. It used to say that the Star-Telegram would only print a photo or print the name of a black person if they had killed a white man.
African Americans in Fort Worth who had the most money were only allowed to live on the eastern edge of town. in Fort Worth in shanties at this time. There was no electricity, no bathrooms, and they had to get their water from the river. It was hard for them to have their own business, and it was even harder to get a job.
Get my car fixed in the white side of town, you definitely feel a little out of place and like you're being talked down to.
I was really upset to the fact that here it is 2018 and we still have to face this. But I also know that it is a fact of life. I serve right now as a co-chair for the Race and Culture Committee for the City of Fort Worth so that we can look at what those disparities are, because they will continue, good, bad, or different, especially in our Hispanic market, because we're always going to have that first generation because we're so close to Mexico, the border, and which is fine. This country was made up of immigrants, and that's a thing that I think sometimes as generations go to the 5th and 6th and 7th generation, they don't realize what their forefathers had to go through when they first arrived here. The last millennium, they all came from European countries. This millennium, they'll be coming from Latin American countries.
And that was always strange to me, because when we finally came up with busing in 1973, when white kids were going to be bused, I said, we can't bus kids. And all the black folks said, what? Since when? We've been bused all our lives. But I.M. Terrell was the only school, not just for blacks in Fort Worth. It was the only black high school for kids from Weatherford. Because all these cities didn't have high schools for black kids.
Because back in the 70s, they did the desegregation of schools. We ended up getting a lot of African Americans because they closed down Kirkpatrick High School. So those students either came to Diamond Hill or Northside. Now, I heard the difference at Northside High School and at Triple Tech, that sometimes those tensions were there, but there were much bigger schools.
By the time I got to high school, there were 4 black high schools. Because what the Fort Worth School District did in Brown versus Board of Education, when the Supreme Court said you got to integrate, Fort Worth said, well, we're not going to integrate, we're just going to add 3 more black high schools. And that's what they did.
We'll say, oh, wow, you speak so well, as if you couldn't have been educated to that level.
And one of the things my father's always told us, you can't make a difference if you're not there at the table.
You guys being raised in this era where Trump has become president, you can see that polarity again occurring. Like I think things had gotten calm. At least for me, I saw a lot more racial issues happening in the early 90s.
And keep in mind, racism, prejudice, bigotry, these are not innate things. You're not born with it. You learn it.
It took until 1963 for stores, restaurants, and theaters to finally integrate, but racism is still a problem today.